Last week when we set the clocks back, and Tuesday night, Scott Walker and the Republicans cleaned Democrats' clocks. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, the wave turned into a tidal wave. In the House of Representatives, Republicans win more seats than they've held since before Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president. Republicans also take control of the United States Senate. Wisconsin's Ron Johnson becomes the powerful chairman of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, where he will be the Senate's top government watchdog. The wave extended to state houses as well. Republicans now hold more than 30 governorships, including in blue states like Maryland, Massachusetts, and Illinois. But we start with what happened here. Despite being organized labor's top national target, Scott Walker makes it a three-peat, winning the third election for governor in just 4 years, pretty much the way he won the first two. Walker defeated Mary Burke 52-47, and he brought along some friends. Waukesha County District Attorney Brad Schimmel was elected Attorney General, and Republicans boosted their legislative majorities. In the Assembly, Republicans will hold 63 of 99 seats, their biggest margin since 1957. In the state Senate, Republicans picked up a seat, giving them a 1914 majority. Now joining me on our panel this morning, defense attorney and Democrat Dan Adams, former state representative Michelle Litchens, political strategist Lynn DeBruin, and the managing editor of RightWisconsin.com, Colin Roth. Well, there's a lot to digest here, so let's start by looking at the biggest winners and losers from Tuesday. Colin Roth.
Well, besides the obvious winners of Scott Walker, Brad Schimmel, and the legislative majorities, I would say a big winner would be the alternative media. I think two of the biggest, most impactful, important stories that we saw in the campaigns came from nonprofit independent news sites. I'd also add in Marquette Law Poll.
Right.
You know, a lot of people discounted that final poll. Turned out to be one of the most accurate polls.
Okay, Dan Adams.
Yeah, the Law Poll was right on. That was included in my winners. Also, in terms of winners, are going to be tax policy geeks. That's going to be Scott Walker and the Republicans' big thing is some type of huge tax reform here. We're going to have to get out to figure out who our wonks are and dial them up and see what's going to happen.
Okay, who are the biggest losers?
There's many on my side of the aisle. I'd say the county board by proxy.
Take all the time you want. The county board?
The county board by proxy. John Weishon just got decimated. They sponsored this referendum saying, we want a county administrator, not an executive. That went down in flames. And everybody who was sitting on the county board saying, I hope Mary Burke wins so I have a job come a year and a half.
They might actually have to get a real day job. Okay, biggest winners and losers, Michelle Litchens.
Winners, I think there are so many different winners out across the country. We have a gay Republican congressman that was elected as a Republican in California. We have a gay Republican representative elected in the state of Wisconsin. Mia Love, the first black female Republican congresswoman elected in Utah. Tim Scott is the first black U.S. Senator from the South since Reconstruction. They are all Republicans, and you have not heard anything from the NAACP about that.
Okay, biggest losers.
Labor unions. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to force the ideas down the American people's throats, and they returned back.
Okay, biggest winners and losers.
Well, obviously the GOP across the country. In addition to having some of the largest majorities, a lot of Republican women were winners this year. Republican governors came in. I think that in addition to just the GOP in general, you've got a lot of the GOP congressional folks that won were moderates, not Tea Party members or conservative Republicans, but not Tea Party. So there's a little balance shifting there. I also think that the Republican Senatorial Committee is a big winner. They outgunned the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee in ways that was never expected. In fact, the Democrats have been kind of crowing and bragging that they were doing so much better on the doors.
Biggest losers.
Well, frankly, I think the biggest loser is President Obama, because if you look at the ballot measures that were passed in many states, they were actually very progressive. So it wasn't the Republicans' message that sold, at least not in my opinion. I think this was an election against some of the things that Obama had done, from the Obamacare rollout to him saying he didn't have a policy on ISIS. So to me, the biggest loser is Obama.
Okay, I mean, obviously the biggest winner here is Scott Walker, who wins 3 times. To be targeted like that and still to win by that margin is huge. The legislative Republican majorities, very, very impressive. But in terms of losers, there are so many. I would say Mike Tate, the chairman of the State Democratic Party, who was the mastermind of the Mary Burke campaign. I would say State Senator Chris Larson, who was the leader of the Democrats in the Senate. They lost a seat. I would also say that the war on women was a complete flop this year. You had Wendy Davis goes down in Texas. You have Mark Udall, who ran as Mark Uterus in Colorado, goes down in flames. Even Sandra Fluke loses her seat. It just did not play the way they were hoping it would play. The obvious big loser, though, is big labor. I mean, labor staked everything they had. They hundreds of millions of dollars on going after certain governors. They in fact almost bypassed some of the Senate races because they wanted to target what they thought were anti-labor Democratic governors. They lost in Florida, they lost in Michigan, and Scott Walker was their #1 biggest target. But I think you're right. I think it was not just Obama was a loser, but I think it's the Obama liberal agenda is the loser, and that's one of the reasons why the depth of this. I mean, this was broad. In terms of the defeat, but also when you start seeing how many legislative houses are controlled by the Republicans, that's the bench, that's the farm team for a political party, and Democrats have been wiped out maybe for a generation.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think big labor, Mike Tate, and your war on women. I think we may. There will always be gender politics. Right. It's the gender gaps always exist. But I think what it really ended up being was a really substance-free campaign, and it was something that they really overplayed their hand. And I think you really saw the kind of the end of
Mary
that.
Burke won by what, 9 points among women, but then Scott Walker won by more than 20 points among men. So in terms of the gender gap, didn't really play out very well for the Democrats. So what has your glass half full this week, and what has your glass half empty? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, you're first.
My glass is half full because Tuesday's high turnout election was conducted without controversy. No missing ballots, no allegations of fraud. This shows Wisconsin's election process doesn't need voter ID or other dramatic changes to the democratic process. My glass is half empty because Democrats didn't just lose the governorship and AG office. Democrats also lost all of their marginal seats in the legislature, which will deplete the party's farm system of candidates and diverse perspectives for years.
Michelle Litchens.
My glass is half full because Republicans won everything Tuesday. It's half empty because nationally Republicans have a propensity for destroying any good that happens to them, and the media is ready to pounce on their smallest mistake.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my glass is half full because for the first time in history there will now be 100 women in Congress. But my glass is half empty because 100 women out of 585 representatives means that more than 80% of our representatives are still men. And frankly, the gentlemen haven't gotten much done.
Colin Roth.
My glass is more than half full because Republicans ran the table in Wisconsin, winning just about everywhere. But it's a little bit empty because Republican Secretary of State candidate Julian Bradley came up just a little bit short of making it a perfect night.
Well, my glass is half full because President Obama said he heard what the voters were saying last Tuesday. It's half empty because he then went on to make it clear that he intended to ignore it. Now, was it a victory speech or the first speech of a presidential campaign? We'll talk about Governor Scott Walker's future plans coming up next. 3 elections in 4 years. Governor Scott Walker wins a full second term. Democrat Mary Burke brought in the big guns, including Presidents Clinton and Obama, but her margin in Milwaukee and Dane counties could not counteract Walker's numbers in suburban counties in the Fox Valley. On election night, Walker and his family got to celebrate again.
It doesn't matter what class you were born into. In America, you can do and be anything you want.
Now, to some folks, that sort of, kind of, a little bit sounded like a presidential campaign speech. Do you think he's running, Linda Bruin?
You asked the Democrat.
Yeah, well.
Well, I do think it sounded like a pre-presidential speech. On the other hand, he's very good at what he intends or how he communicates. Yeah. And frankly, it could also just be a joyous, I won the governorship again. So I don't think it's automatically that he's running, but I think it's a good chance.
Okay, Michelle Litchens, first of all, do you think he's running? And what effect will that have on pushing to his agenda in the legislature? Is it a plus? Is it a negative?
Right now, I honestly think he is not personally running for president. But what he did, the fact that he was able to be elected, you know, 3 times in 4 years in Wisconsin, the entire country is talking about this guy. You can't leave the state of Wisconsin in a political circle and not have people talking about our governor. They will recruit him and they will pull him into the political or presidential circle.
Dan Adams.
I'm going to say something nice. My mother's taught me to, you know, once in a while say something nice about the opponents. I like optimism. I like the American exceptionalism that he noted. It was very kind of Reagan-esque in that way, maybe without as much charisma as our former president. But, you know, as for form and kind of substance, boy, it could have been a little kid blowing through a kazoo in that speech. There just wasn't anything there.
Okay.
I think he is running. I think this is the beginning, and that was, you know, he was on national TV. He knew exactly what he was doing, that he was going to be on cable news and had a platform like that, and he gave a very intentional speech that mentioned Washington almost more than Wisconsin, I think. So I do think he's running. It doesn't mean it's a formal announcement of any sort.
I don't know whether he's running or not, but I figure I'm guessing that he thinks, why not play out the string a little bit?
Absolutely.
Because, you know, there's 2 kinds of presidential campaigns. There's the kind that is in your own head, where you think that you should be able to run a lot of people. And then there is the one where people around the country are looking at you and saying, well, why not you? And that's one of the reasons why I think that, you know, to a certain extent, you know, go through some of the, you know, make yourself available, get mentioned, and see what happens. Because, you know, I can certainly envision a scenario, believe it or not, where the big guns like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Chris Christie burn themselves out. There are huge segments of the conservative constituency who would find each one of them unacceptable, but who finds Scott Walker unacceptable on the right? So it could happen. My concern is that it will be a distraction. He has a tremendous opportunity here with this Republican legislature to get a lot done. If, in fact, there's presidential buzz and he's traveling a lot, then I do think that might actually undermine his ability to get things done in the second term.
Yeah, I think he's a brilliant election strategist. And this goes back years ago, from when he was in the legislature to the county executive and now the governor. I do think he's always kind of been very good at figuring out what do you need to do to run a good campaign and to win. And I also think that he's put himself in a perfect position by having people come to him and say, I want you to run. A candidate can't be in a better position than that. You don't want to look like you're slobbering for it. You don't want to look like that's all you're going for. And he's done a good job.
This could really work out well for the state of Wisconsin, because if Scott Walker wants to take that next step, he has to continue down the same path he's been on, and he has to move the state forward with the Republicans that were elected here. And I actually think he's going to make sure that he does more than what he did.
How do they work out this? Paul Ryan's clearly also being mentioned. They're friends. They're not rivals. You're not going to have Ryan and Walker both running. How does that get sorted out?
I think they're going to sort that out amongst themselves.
Well, how do they do that? How does that happen? I mean, you know,
I think it's going to be taken care of in the public for them too. I mean, if you see a strong pull out there for someone from the federal government to run for president versus a governor, I think that's going to be sorted out. You know,
have your fellow Democrats figured out, Dan, that every time they go after him this way, they make him stronger? I mean, that's one of the interesting things, is that you would think, I know that there was an attempt to, there was sort of a little bit of a narrative that he was limping toward re-election, that he was badly damaged, but he won rather decisively. And I wonder whether at some point people realize that every time you target him and he survives, he becomes a bigger national figure. Even Ed Schultz from MSNBC was making that point over the week.
He is. I mean, and he rightly is being mentioned for president, and I think he's earned that. And it will be interesting to see, along with Michelle's point, whether he focuses on Wisconsin or if he plods ahead.
Well, another reason why it is plausible is I think that, and the election underlines this, I think that most of the innovation in the legislation in the next couple of years is going to take place at the state level rather than at the federal level. I think the federal government will continue to be gridlocked, and people are going to be looking at these legislatures and these governors to get things done. Now, you may not want to hear it, but we'll tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Dan Adams, you're first.
To state Senate Democrats, don't allow yourselves to be led again by Chris Larson. His incompetence during the last legislative session was predictable, but he was supposed to be good at running campaigns. Now that he's proven himself inept in that area, time for a change.
Michelle Litchens.
Republicans in Washington take a lesson from the Democrats. They know how to keep the majority. They fight behind closed doors, and they are patient with legislation. Do those two things, and we may just have a Republican president in 2016.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my advice is also to the GOP. Most of your winning candidates were moderates and conservatives, not Tea Party members. Take this opportunity and find some common ground with the president, or the voters will turn on you in 2016.
Colin Roth.
Well, along these same lines, my unsolicited advice is for the new Republican majorities in Congress. Govern. Pass an agenda. Don't be deterred by President Obama's veto pen. The bills Obama signs will show America you're not just a party of no. The bills he vetoes will crystallize the differences going forward.
Well, my unsolicited advice is to state of Wisconsin Democrats. After 3 straight defeats, you might be thinking about getting rid of your state chairman, Mike Tate. Under Tate, you lost both houses of the legislature, 2 congressional seats, a Senate seat, and 3 state elections for governor. My advice, don't change a thing. Next on Sunday Insight, what's next for Democrats in Wisconsin after their big losses on Tuesday night? If you're a Democrat, Tuesday's election didn't have much good news. Scott Walker reelected, a new Republican Attorney General, big conservative majorities in both houses of the legislature. So what now? Now, Dan Adams, you seem to think that State Chairman Mike Tate is doing a bang-up job. This was from your Twitter feed from Wednesday. Sincere kudos to Michael J. Tate. Burke-Happ was a solid slate. National headwinds couldn't be helped. They kept D's in game till end, so pretty much steady as you go, Dan?
10 days ago, 10 days before the election, we thought this was a toss-up. Yeah. And the only reason it was is because Mike Tate bit the bullet, recruited moderate women candidates to carry the banner. Had he listened to the left wing of the party and put up some real firebrands, nobody would have been talking about Walker v. the Democrats this year. He kept us in the game. So I'll stand by that statement. The one thing Democrats
I completely agree with you here. Just so you know, Mike.
The one thing Democrats need to start doing is fighting internally, though, and start to have these bigger philosophical fights that the Republicans do every year.
Well, wasn't that exactly what Mike Tate, though, didn't allow to happen? I mean, he did hand-select Mary Burke. He ran through all of the focus groups and everything, figured that she didn't need to have an agenda, didn't need to have a personality, didn't embed her resume. I don't know, that didn't work out for them, did it?
Yeah, for the party that likes to talk about this is what democracy looks like, they didn't let the democratic process roll out. They didn't have a primary. They squashed any opposition, and they did everything possible to keep Kathleen Vinehout out way back in December and January.
Okay, Linda Bowen?
Well, how do I say this without being really obnoxious?
Oh, I should go for it.
I think you have to look at the slate of people he had as possible candidates. And I think he was right to try and pick someone who could have a legitimate pro-business resume, which a lot of independents would like. On the other hand, Mary Burke did not turn out to be the candidate that we had hoped for. She clearly was pretty inexperienced, and some of that showed. And so, he had a lot of losses, but at the same time, he at least picked a possible.
Well, the Democrats are going to be in a lot of trouble in the state of Wisconsin because we have some really smart leaders in the Assembly and in the Senate and our governor. And so I don't think they're going to be screwing up as much, so the Democrats aren't going to do their job as the minority by saying, calling the Republicans out every time they mess up.
Well, you know what, I actually do agree with you at least one point, Dan, is, who else? Who else will going to run? Which also is a reflection on how weak the bench for the Democrats are, how weak the farm team is, and this is going to be a problem going forward. So what is it you don't get? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, you're first.
We just had a major contested election where both parties ignored the dismal state of educational outcomes in Milwaukee. MPS is a scandal. Charter and choice schools lack accountability. By ignoring this major issue, both parties did no service to Milwaukee's kids.
Michelle Litchens.
Charlie, what I don't get is why the mainstream media will buckle down on their hard left views instead of hearing Tuesday's election results and taking more of a middle road approach to the news.
Linda Bruin.
Republicans are often so diehard that they'll vote for anyone with an R by their name. But I don't get why voters in New York's 11th congressional district elected a Republican who's facing a 20-count federal indictment, or why voters in Louisiana's 4th CD re-elected a pro-life Republican even after he demanded that his wife get 2 abortions and that one of his mistresses get an abortion as well.
Colin Roth.
Yikes. What I don't get is why so many got sucked into discounting the final Marquette University law poll, when for a 3rd straight election it proved to be the most accurate. Was it just wishful thinking on the part of the press that hoped Mary Burke had a shot?
Well, what I don't get is why Democrats really thought they could beat Scott Walker with a candidate without a personality, a plan, or a credible resume. Next on Sunday Insight, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to once again pick the winners and losers of the week. Dan Adams, you're first.
My winners are all of us. America's economy is heating up. There is consistent and solid job growth. The stock market is climbing. Quantitative easing has been abandoned, and energy costs are down. Great trends. My losers, MPS board chair Michael Bonds, who recently attempted to bully the Journal Sentinel into reassigning its school reporter. MPS needs more sunshine and, frankly, more critical awareness of its activities, not less.
Michelle Litchens.
My winner is Rebel Pundit, who created a video with black leaders who finally ask, why does the black community continue to elect Democrats? One man said, Detroit isn't run by white Republicans, and blacks are held down by black politicians. You are brave for speaking out, and take a look at Chicago Activists Unchained. My loser is Jimmy Fallon. He tweeted, Utah made history by electing Mia Love to Congress. She is a black female Republican Mormon. Even Unicorn said, not buying it. Well, Mr. Fallon, now you are just another lefty actor without any class.
Linda Bruin.
Well, there are the obvious winners, like the GOP and Governor Scott Walker, but I'd like to mention a different Republican, South Carolina's Tim Scott, who is the first African-American elected to the U.S. Senate from the South in 133 years. He's also the only African-American who will have served in both the House and the Senate. Now for losers. I'm a proud Democrat, and unfortunately my losers are President Obama and the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, who spent $60 million on an 8-month voter registration and turnout effort in 10 states, but they lost the Senate anyway.
Colin Roth.
My winners this week are alternative media. Two of the most important and impactful stories that defined the campaign season were first broken by Wisconsin Reporter and Media Trackers, independent nonprofit outlets. Creation of alternative media is not only to combat bias, but to cover the stories and ask the questions that the mainstream media won't. My loser this week is the War on Women campaign message. Once thought to be a silver bullet campaign strategy, the Democrats overplayed their hand in 2014 by running a slew of substance-free campaigns nationwide. Democrats may have won women, but now they have their own gender problem among men.
Well, loser, I think Obama-style liberalism from the U.S. Senate to the House, the governor's races around the country. We saw a perfect storm, an unpopular president, a dysfunctional government, and a discredited ideology. Winner, Scott Walker. After the siege of Madison, the runaway senators, the recall, the partisan John Doe, attacks from a hostile news media, and tens of millions of dollars of union money and ads aimed at defeating him. After all of that, Scott Walker wins a second full term so decisively that he's ignited presidential buzz. The harder they hit this guy, the stronger he gets. Thanks for joining us. And join me for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.
Get the coaches to